we keep coming back. We gonna
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
rise up till it's won.
So happy to have you here.
We
We're just going to give folks another minute or so to join the Zoom room, and then we'll get started. So feel free to take a moment to get settled in. If you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, change your name to reflect the name you normally use, feel free to. And for folks who are just joining again, we're gonna give everyone a moment to get settled, and then we'll dive in.
We gonna rise up till it's won. We gonna rise up till it's won. When the people rise up, the powers come down. When the people rise up, the powers come down. They tried to stop us, but we keep coming back. They tried to stop us, but we keep coming back. They tried to stop us, but we keep coming back.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. So happy to have you here. And Peter, if we could get a pause on the music, that would be awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everyone again. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here on a Wednesday evening and deciding that the emissions cap policy is worth showing up for and fighting for. I want to send a really special welcome to everyone on this call who's been touched by the devastating wildfires that are raging across the country. Whether you or your loved ones have been threatened with evacuation, or whether you've been under air quality advisories, or whether you're just feeling the weight of it all, the weight of this moment, I want to thank you especially for being here. And with the country on fire and thousands of people reckoning with the worst climate impacts in Canada's history, it's clear that we're in desperate need of sound and ambitious climate policy. So that's why we're here today, to plan to welcome Parliament back from summer vacation with one resounding demand: for no more delays in a climate emergency, and to deliver a bold emissions cap now. And Peter, can I get a click? So we're looking at a slide that says acknowledging land and a URL for a website, native-land.ca. Just to help out for anyone using a screen reader, we're going to be describing what's on the slides over the course of the webinar. And before we get to anything else, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the lands that we're all gathered on, and especially in this moment, as we're living through the devastating wildfires that are caused by the climate crisis. It's really important for all of us to remember that the climate crisis itself is a product of the exploitation of land and resources that was created under the system of colonization. And that a really important aspect of why these fires have gotten as bad as they have and become as devastating as they have been is because Indigenous systems of managing the land have been stamped out under colonialism. And if Indigenous sovereignty were enforced across this country, there's a very real chance that these fires would not be burning in the way that they are now. Also reflecting on how Indigenous communities have always been the most vulnerable in climate emergencies like the one we're seeing now. They're the first to be evacuated and the first to lose homes to return to. And it's on all of us to remember that sound climate policy starts and ends with the restoration of Indigenous sovereignty. And that's central to our work as we begin to talk about what's at stake for us in winning a bold emissions cap. So before we go any farther, just want to introduce myself. My name is Kate. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an organizer and campaigner with Lead Now, and I'm joined by my co-facilitator, Rivka, and I'll pass it over to Rivka to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Rivka. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a campaigner at Lead Now and very happy to be co-hosting this organizing call tonight. It's great to see so many people out organizing for the ambitious emissions cap that we need. And I will pass it back to Kate.
Thanks, Rivka. And I also just want to give a shout out to Ellen, who's our chat moderator. If you have any questions during the webinar or need support with anything, Ellen is your go-to gal. You can send her a message in the chat, either privately or however suits you. And yeah, there's some other Lead Now folks on the call who are also available to give you support if you need it. And Peter, can I get a click? All right, so now we're looking at a slide that says introduce yourselves, and I'll read the rest of the text aloud. So I'm just going to invite everyone who hasn't had a chance to already to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and your pronouns, where you're calling in from, and what's at stake for you when it comes to the climate crisis. And it can be something big or it can be something small. And I also want to invite everyone to take a moment to respond to someone else's comment. If it's just a heart, that's totally fine. Or if you want to just say something, say hi, say, oh man, yeah, like I've had that same experience. It's really nice to know that we're all in this fight together and that we all have something in common to lose from the climate crisis, as well as something to gain in fighting it. And while we're all doing that, Peter, I'm going to get a click. While we're all introducing ourselves, I'm also just going to take a moment to introduce Lead Now. Likely many of you already know about Lead Now because you're here on this call, but it may also be your first time at a Lead Now organizing call. So Lead Now is a small and mighty staff team. We're just 13 staff, but we work on behalf of 500,000 supporters across the country, including all of you. And in that sense, we are very much big and mighty. And together we work to advance a united progressive vision for Canada, and all of our power and our direction and our funding comes from our members. Climate justice has always been a top issue for the Lead Now community, but over the last few years, it's become the single biggest concern for our members. So that's why we've been campaigning for a bold emissions cap for the last year and a half, alongside a number of other campaigns to hold our government and corporations accountable on climate. So welcome everyone in the chat again. It's wonderful to see all of your introductions pouring in. Thank you again so much for being here. Peter, can I get one more click? And then just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. We, as I mentioned before, are going to be describing the content of slides to help out anyone who's using a screen reader. On this slide, various Zoom features are highlighted. If you're new to Zoom, the most important feature to know about is the chat icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're going to be dropping some important links in the chat over the course of the call, and that's also your space to ask questions or talk with other participants on the organizing call today. There's also an option to enable closed captions if that's helpful to you. We also just encourage you to keep your video on because it's nice to see all of the faces that are here with us tonight. All right, so I'm just gonna poll the crowd really quickly. I would love it if you could put an exclamation mark in the chat if you have taken action for a bold emissions cap before, whether it was an MP meeting or a petition or a day of action. It doesn't have to have been with Lead Now, but it can have been. I'm just gonna leave a moment for the exclamation marks to flood in. Amazing, that's so great to see. And then I would like you to put an X in the chat if this is your very first time dipping a toe into the issue of the emissions cap and you're kind of coming into it for the first time. Awesome, okay, that's so cool. Well, welcome everyone. Yeah, whether you are a veteran to the emissions cap issue or whether you're here for the first time, you are very, very welcome. And then I would also like you to put a frowny face like this in the chat if you are really fed up with the delays and ready for the federal government to deliver on climate. Yeah, that's also how I feel. Yeah, so I want to acknowledge that for some of you, this call might feel like deja vu because we have been organizing on the emissions cap for a long time, and we've been expecting the emissions cap to be released for a long time as well. For those of you who are here for the first time hearing about emissions cap policy, we're going to get into some of the context for why that is, what the emissions cap policy is, what's at stake if it's delayed, and why this fall is so critical for getting it passed. And then from there, we'll share our plan to welcome MPs back to Parliament with one clear demand: no more delay, pass a bold emissions cap now. And it's so exciting to see that the uniting strand for all of us on this call is that we are so fed up with the federal government's response to climate, and we're all ready to receive more. And on that note, I will pass it to Rivka.
Thank you. And the next slide says a reminder on what we deserve, because before we get into all of the political context and dive into the specifics of the emissions cap policy, we have to remember that while we're united by our disappointment and our anger after all of these delays, it's also really important to think about the positive things that we're fighting for and what we deserve as people in the climate movement and just as people in general. So we are campaigning for the future that every person deserves. We all deserve the promise of a safe and dignified life. We all deserve clean air, we all deserve clean water, and the assurance that we won't have to flee our homes with each passing summer. We all deserve to imagine futures that are rich and fulfilling and that aren't colored by fear of the climate crisis. I've seen some examples just now looking through the chat, everyone introducing themselves. People are here for themselves, for their children, for their grandchildren, for other living things, other people in our communities. We all deserve a future that is safe. And right now, many of those things are being stolen from us by the climate crisis and by the handful of fossil fuel companies who are driving it. So that's why we're all here together tonight. And with that, next slide. Thank you. This slide says the stakes, and it has a text that I'm going to speak to with a picture of a wildfire. Canadians are living through climate devastation on an unprecedented scale. Right now, we're living through the worst fire season in Canada's history, the worst one so far. 167,589 people have been evacuated from their homes, and entire cities are choking on noxious smoke due to raging fires. And in some parts of the country, there's also flooding that has wiped out homes, crops, and critical infrastructure. So if you or someone you know has been directly impacted by this summer's wildfire season, drop an X in the chat if you feel comfortable sharing. We know this has affected everyone in different ways, and there's definitely communities who are on the front lines here, but I'm already seeing X's start to come in because really the climate crisis is affecting all of us, especially this year with this wildfire season that we've had. Can we go to the next slide? So this one says the fossil fuel industry is to blame, and it has text that I'm speaking to next to a picture of an oil rig. We know that the oil and gas industry is directly responsible for this climate devastation that we've all been experiencing this summer. Recent studies have shown us a direct link between the carbon emissions emitted by major oil and gas companies and the increase in extreme wildfires in Canada and of course elsewhere as well. They're happy to profit off of climate chaos, and this is why we need a government policy to cap emissions, which brings us to the next slide. This one has the title, The Emissions Cap. It's what we're here to talk about, a text that I'm speaking to with a picture of a windmill. It has never been more clear that a handful of fossil fuel companies emitting far more than their fair share of emissions are holding us back from the climate progress that we need. The emissions cap, as many of you already know, but if you don't, that's why we're talking about it, is a long-promised liberal policy that would place a limit, or cap, so-called, on carbon emissions. Canada has not met an emissions reduction target for over 2 decades, including under Prime Minister Trudeau's leadership. Over 2 decades is a long time. That is a lot of deadlines missed and a lot of targets failed. But we have a chance to change this only if we can cap carbon pollution from the oil and gas industry and force them to wind down their production. There's no other way to meet our climate goals and turn this around. So that's what a strong emissions cap would do. If we get it right, an emissions cap would be a critical tool that can help us tackle the climate crisis in Canada, and it could define the Liberals' climate legacy. We also know from polling that 70% of Canadians support a strong emissions cap policy, and that's a clear majority, so it should be an obvious choice. Brings me to the next slide. So why the delay? This slide has text that I'm speaking to with pictures of a Pathways Alliance ad that you may have seen. This is an ad from Pathways Alliance that says, "Let's clear the air." Why has this policy been delayed when it is such an obvious solution? Every way you look at it, the emissions cap is a common sense and critically needed policy that could help rein in the fossil fuel industry's polluting emissions. And it could put Canada back on track to tackle the climate crisis. But despite all of that, we are now at the end of August 2023, a year late from when the Liberals first promised to release the emissions caps draft regulations. And those draft regulations are the first step in a longer legislative process that will get the policy passed into law. Since then, they've delayed the regulations release 3 times, so we haven't even reached the first step of this policy, which begs the question, in the midst of a climate emergency in which thousands of people in Canada are suffering, what possible reason could the Liberals have to delay? And we know the culprit in both cases is the same, the fossil fuel industry. Instead of doing their part to bring emissions down, the 6 largest oil and gas companies, united under the banner of the lobbying group Pathways Alliance, spent the summer lobbying to weaken and delay the emissions cap. And that's because they don't want to actually take responsibility for their pollution. To that end, we know they've been meeting with our politicians as much as 7 times a day, far more access than any of us in the climate movement get, or than any average Canadian is going to get to our elected officials. So if these fossil fuel companies get their way, at best, the emissions cap policy will be watered down, maybe to such a degree that big oil will be let completely off the hook. And at worst, it will get delayed and pushed back into oblivion and never even make it into draft form. So this sounds pretty scary, and it does look like their plan might be succeeding so far. But we're going to dive a little bit more into where the policy is at and what comes next. This slide says, "Where's the emissions cap at now?" with text that I'm speaking to next to pictures of Minister Stephen Guilbeault and Deputy Premier Chrystia Freeland. Earlier this summer in 2023, we started hearing rumors that the Minister of the Environment, Stephen Guilbeault, was planning to release the draft regulations of the emissions cap policy in late October. So this is already delayed, but this is the deadline that we had heard. But since then, it's become less and less clear whether the Liberals are on track to deliver. While Guilbeault is still saying that he supports strong regulations, we've been hearing that other powerful forces within the Liberal Party, including Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who's pictured here, are actively pushing to delay the policy further. And the thing is, with an election coming up faster than any of us would like, the Liberals don't have much time left to turn their platform promises into law. And if these draft regulations are delayed even one more time, remember they've already been delayed 3 times, there's a very real risk that the emissions cap policy could be abandoned for good. And with the outcome of the next election, whenever it is, up in the air, there's no guarantee that we'll get another shot at passing a policy like this. Next slide. This is why we need to act now. This slide is red with yellow text in bold saying "our plan." In the midst of all of these delays in this complex political context, we have right now a key window to act. MPs are returning to Parliament in just under 2 weeks, and Liberals will have their caucus meeting, and then session will resume. So this is our chance to make sure that every single backbencher MP in the Liberal Party, as they're preparing to return to Parliament, hears the same message, and that message is no more delay. We need the emissions cap now. If we're loud enough and united enough, we can force the emissions cap back onto the Liberals' agenda for this fall, because we know that delay is not an option. So Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have a bit of time on the agenda for a Q&A right now before we get into more details about our plan. We're obviously going to tell you what's actually the plan is, but first we wanted to take a few moments for questions on the policy itself, what it is that we're fighting for here. So you can ask a question by raising your hand in Zoom, or you can write it in the chat, and we'll try to get to 2 or 3 questions before we move on. So if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat now, and we'll just take a few minutes to answer them. These are looking for questions about the emissions cap policy itself. And yes, thank you for pointing out in the chat. You can also send any questions privately if you look under your chat box, and you can select Peter in the chat if you'd like to remain anonymous while you ask a question. I'll also say that if questions occur later, we will have a bit of time at the end. And if anyone would like to stay just a few minutes past the hour, we can also answer questions then.
Rivka, we had an anonymous question about what about post-production emissions? Are they considered?
Do you want me to jump in, Rivka?
Yeah.
Yes. So this is specifically on the production-related emissions of the oil and gas industry. In this case, with the oil and gas industry, there is a pretty direct link between the two. But the oil and gas industry is currently the biggest emitter in Canada. So holding them accountable to our emissions reductions targets is really, really critical to Canada meeting its climate targets.
We had another question from Bob. What emissions would be capped, oil and gas industry or end use?
And I believe that would be the same. So it would be the oil and gas industry, the oil and gas industry's emissions that would be capped. And I see one more question in the chat from Peter about whether Stephen Guilbeault is still serious about getting this done or hamstrung by others in his caucus with more power than him. And on that front, we can only really speculate, but it does seem like there are divisions in caucus around the emissions cap policy and how critical it is. We know that there are high-ranking members in the Liberal caucus and in the Liberal cabinet who really feel that the emissions cap could be a divisive electoral issue that could hurt their chances, especially in Alberta. But we know that this is fear-mongering, and it's an earworm that's been created by the fossil fuel lobby. So we know that these divisions are existing already, that there are members within the Liberal Party who strongly support an emissions cap, and it's our job to embolden them and then to erode the confidence of those who are blocking progress. And maybe with that, all of your questions are noted, and we'll do our best to keep on answering them if we can. And there'll be more time for questions later when we come toward the end of our call. But for now, let's move on to a conversation about our plan to hold the Liberal government accountable on climate. Peter, thank you for the screen share. All right, so Peter, could I get one more slide? All right, so the next slide has text that I'll be speaking to and a picture of some Lead Now volunteers. So the thing that's really important to understand about where the emissions cap is at right now is that many Liberal MPs are more afraid of the political price they might pay for holding a small handful of fossil fuel companies accountable than they are of the consequences they'll face from their constituents and their voters alike if they continue to delay action on the climate crisis. And that's because, as Rivka talked about, Big Oil has launched an aggressive lobbying and marketing offensive to convince our politicians and the general public that we're dependent on them for everything from our jobs to our GDP. And we know that it's all spin and lies, and we know that the fossil fuel industry has no place in a healthy world, but right now they have the money to back those lies up. And the reason we're here today is because the only thing powerful enough to go up against that kind of money is organized people like us. We have a job now to shift the equation and help show our MPs that they owe it to us to take the climate crisis seriously and that they owe nothing to the 5 fossil fuel companies that are holding our futures hostage. And Peter, can I go to the next slide? So the next slide has a photo of an emissions cap action outside of an MP office and another in which Lead Now supporters are meeting with their MP. And for months, Lead Now members have been ramping up the pressure on MPs to pass a strong emissions cap. We've been hosting calling parties and MP meetings and a day of action last May, which I know many folks on this call were involved in. And over the course of all of this, hundreds of Lead Now supporters have showed up to drive the message home for a bold emissions cap. And next slide, please. And over the next 6 slides, I'll be speaking to the text on the slides, and the text on the slides is accompanied by images of Lead Now volunteers. Now, as MPs return to work after a long summer away, we want to welcome them back with that same message. We know that our MPs will be back in their home ridings to hear from constituents the week of September 5th to 8th, that's next week. So we're asking you and anyone who wants this policy passed to drop in on their MPs during office hours when they're in their home riding and to deliver this message face to face. Again, no more delay, deliver a bold emissions cap now. And this is a really critical window of time to have impact before MPs return to Parliament and come back under pressure to drop or delay the emissions cap. So if you don't live in a Liberal riding, don't worry, there is a strategic action you can do, and we'll be talking about that in a second. But if you do live in a Liberal riding, this is a really critical moment to get our MPs' ear while we still have the time and before the legislative priorities for the fall session are decided. And can I get a click? So here's why dropping in on MPs' offices is such a powerful tactic. And some of you, if you were around for the Reject Tech campaign from a few years back, this is a very similar tactic. So MP visits are the #1 most effective way to get MPs' attention. They really aren't expecting it. They get calls and emails all the time. They get requests to meet often. But dozens of in-person visits staggered over time, so it's a steady stream of people dropping in every day, will really impact them and make them feel like their constituents are fired up for a bold emissions cap. And they'll be physically present from September 4th to 8th. They'll be there in their ridings, and so they'll either meet with you directly, or they'll hear you talking to their staff, or they'll receive an update from their staff letting you know that you were in the office wanting to talk to them. So we know that this is a political and moral dilemma for Liberal MPs. We know this because of the rumors we've been hearing about division within the Liberal Party, and your visit will drive home that message to them. We know that face-to-face interactions with MPs will also serve to remind them of the voters who they need for re-election, and will remind them of all the people they'll let down if they make the wrong choice and side with the fossil fuel industry over the people who elected them. We really believe that coordinated and strategic tactics across the country have deep power. We often say that we might not have the money of the oil lobby, but we do have people power and Lead Now supporters in every corner of the country. And together, when we take coordinated action, we can hold a lot of power, especially in a minority situation where MPs are already thinking about re-election. What their constituents say and think holds a particular weight. So here's how MP office drop-ins work. Can we go to the next slide? So what we're going to ask you to do is we're going to invite you to sign up to visit your MP the week of September 5th. That's next week. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to choose a date and a time that works for you that week and sign up. It can be at lunchtime or before you go to work or at the end of your day, whenever works for you. And if you're not 100% sure what day or time, that's totally okay. You can sign up anyways, and we can send you the materials you need for your drop-in. And for this tactic, you won't need to book a meeting with them. You are just signing up to drop in during the week when your MP is in their home constituency office. And then after you sign up, you'll receive a step-by-step toolkit, including how to find your MP's office and the times it's open, and a couple things to print out for your visit. The first is going to be a no more delay sign that you can use when you take a photo outside your MP's office. And the second is an emissions cap fact sheet to drop off to your MP or their staff when you go inside. And it will also be good to think of people who can possibly go with you. One of the nice things about this tactic is you can do it alone, because part of the point is to create a steady drumbeat of individuals dropping into the office every day, but it's also effective to go as a group. So your options are to go alone, to go with a friend or family or a network. Maybe you're part of a local climate group that you could coordinate. Another option would be to join the Lead Now Slack, and you'll receive a link to do that when you sign up to take action. And Slack is our volunteer communication tool. You'll be invited to join a channel where you can meet other supporters in your area and coordinate a time to do this together if you like. And can I get a click? And then on the day of your visit, here is how your day could look. So you would arrive at your MP's office. You're going to take a photo outside with the sign that you printed. And then once you've taken your photo, you're going to walk into the office and ask to speak with the MP. And from there, you can introduce yourself to the MP, let them know you are a constituent, and then share that you are very concerned about the emissions cap policy. And we'll provide you with a few talking points, but the best way to communicate your concern is with a personal story of why you care about addressing the climate crisis. We've heard from many of you what drives your concern about the climate crisis, and all of those stories are incredibly powerful. If your MP isn't available, you can ask to leave a message with the staff. You can hand them the emissions cap fact sheet that will be included in your toolkit. And if the MP isn't available, ask that the fact sheet get passed on to them and that you expect a response. And then from there, you just have to thank the staff and say goodbye. And that's the whole thing from start to finish. So it's a really simple tactic. It's designed to be able to be done alone or in a group. But if hundreds of us take this action together, it can be incredibly powerful, especially in this window of time right before MPs return to Parliament. So we're gonna start to share some resources to get signed up to do an MP drop-in just a moment. But I just want to speak to folks who might not be in Liberal ridings and what kinds of actions you can do instead. So if you don't live in a Liberal riding, you still have a few options for participating in our MP office drop-in tactics. So if you don't live in a Liberal riding, but you live close to a Liberal cabinet minister's riding, you can sign up and then let us know. And there's a question that will ask you this in the sign up page that I'll share in a moment. Because cabinet ministers hold files that apply to the whole country, it's not just their constituents that can visit them. Anyone is very welcome to. So since cabinet ministers are the ones making the decision, we definitely want to visit them if we can, and especially if you are not in a Liberal riding but looking for somewhere to make impact, that's a great place to start. And if you don't live in or close to a Liberal cabinet minister or to a Liberal minister's office, and you don't live in a Liberal riding, that's going to mean that you live in an NDP, a Green, a Conservative, or an Independent riding. So if your MP is NDP or Green, you can still go ahead and do an office drop-in. The more external pressure from opposition parties, the better for us. But if your MP is Conservative, you likely won't make a ton of headway on the emissions cap with them. So if that's the case, we don't want to send you into the lion's den knowing that you probably won't have success. So instead, what we're asking you to do is to leave voicemails with a short list of Liberal cabinet ministers who could decide the fate of the emissions cap. So to recap, if you live in or near a Liberal riding, prioritize dropping in on them. If you live in an NDP or Green riding, you can drop in on your local MP too. And if your MP is Conservative, we have a different calling action that we're going to be asking you to take. And can I get one more click? And then once MPs are back on Parliament Hill, we're going to keep the pressure going with a full suite of tactics, including emails and ads and postering and more, and we'll keep you in the loop on all of it. So the MP drop-ins are the start, but definitely not the end of this push to win a bold emissions cap. All right, and I will pass to Rivka.
Thank you. And can we go to the next slide? This slide says, your turn. Will you sign up to do an MP office walk-in? So very shortly, there will be a link in the chat, and that link is where you can sign up to take part in this campaign and drop into your MP's office sometime between September 5th and 8th. So you can take a moment now, open up your calendar, whether you have a physical calendar app, or you just keep it all in your head. Think about the day that'll work for you that week, whether you want to drop in on your way to work or on your way home if you're out running errands. Think about the time that'll be best for you, and then go ahead, click on the link that Peter just shared in the chat, and that will take you to the sign up form. So while you are doing that, I'll give a bit more context just to share that if you don't know everything that the form asks for, that's okay. In particular, if you don't know who your MP is, you don't have to fill that one out. As long as you put in your postal code, we can make sure to follow up with you and connect you, make sure you have the right address and know where you're going. So this is just a short one-page sign-up form, that most recent link in the chat. As I said, fill in as much information as you can, but you can just leave it blank if you don't know who your MP is. And same thing for the question asking if you live in or close to a cabinet minister's riding. If you don't know, that's okay. Just make sure you enter your postal code in the form, and then we can follow up and help you from there. The form will also let you pick the time and the date that you want to drop in. And the reason we're tracking that is because we want a steady stream of visits all week. The beauty of this tactic is that we don't have to all line up on the day. We just have to all go within the same week. And actually having different people available at different times works out in our favor, because then they're hearing the message over and over, and it's coming from a number of constituents. So do look in your calendar, find the time that works for you, and let us know when that is. And once you filled out the sign up form, let us know in the chat and we can see where people are going to be going and when. That link is in the chat 3 times now, so it should be pretty easy to find. Thank you to our tech support for doing that. And we're also going to share the link where you can sign up to make some phone calls. If you live in a Conservative riding or you're not near a strategic Liberal or NDP riding, you can't do an office, or if you can't do an office drop-in for any other reason, you can also make phone calls and leave this message over voicemail for those key cabinet ministers. I'll also say that, we know going to an MP's office unannounced and asking for a meeting might feel a bit intimidating. I've been a climate activist for years and can still sometimes get nervous when I take actions like this that require actually having, an in-person conversation with someone. It's not the same as sending them an email. But the reason that we're inviting each of you to visit your MP is because we know that this is one of the most effective ways that we can pressure them to implement a bold emissions cap. It really does make a difference. Even if your MP isn't available or is in a meeting and you meet with staff, having that in-person conversation and connection when you're passing along this fact sheet and your reasons for demanding a bold emissions cap, we know that that's going to have an impact. So hopefully that will help anyone who's feeling a little intimidated by this. Don't be. The reason that MPs have constituency offices is so that they can hear from their constituents. All right. I think if we could get the link posted one more time, just so it's in the bottom of the chat for anyone who needs to be signing up. Thank you. So the link is there. All right. One other thing you can do if you are unable to attend an MP MP office drop-in for any reason, maybe you don't have time to spare that week, or if you want to support the fight for a bold emissions cap in a different way, can also consider making a donation to help us sustain our work. As Kate mentioned at the start of this call, Lead Now is almost entirely funded by small donations from people like you, our supporters across the country. And campaigns like this, a little bit really does go a long way in ensuring that we can keep our focus on building our strategic and people-powered campaigns on the issues that matter to us, to all of you, to everyone who's here in this Zoom tonight. So we have that Zoom link there. I'm seeing some questions here that folks are answering in the chat. But do feel free to keep signing up there. And we already have a number of responses coming in. We've already got, wow, almost 36 people who have signed up to do an office drop-in. So thank you, everyone. I'm sure those will keep coming in as I'm talking. That's great to see. Oh, literally, as I said that sentence, two more came in. And geographically distributed too, which is great. So we're having people who are going to be going to Liberal MPs, going to NDP MPs. One thing, Kay may have already mentioned this, if you do have an NDP MP, and you want to bring forward the emissions cap to them, we know that many of them are already in support. So it's great to ask them to continue that support. But another thing to bring up is the supply and confidence agreement in those conversations, and encouraging the NDP MP or their staff, whoever it is you're speaking to really prioritize climate action and the emissions cap, as they do hold that key leverage right now in Parliament. All right. Thank you, everyone who's filling out this form. It's amazing to see all of the responses coming in. We're nearly at 40 responses now of folks who have signed up to go visit their MPs between September 5th and September 8th. So that is great. And as Kate said, as I said, if you are not able to go visit, or if you live in a riding or you live too far, the link is now in the chat where you can call the key cabinet ministers who are going to be deciding this policy. So during that same week, September 5th to 8th, when they're getting that steady stream of people coming into the office, we also want them to be getting that steady stream of phone calls. So that is also very important to be making those phone calls at the link in the chat. And that link will also, of course, be shared with everyone via email as well. So don't worry too much about writing it down. All right, the link will be posted again, so feel free to keep signing up. While everyone is doing that, we also wanted to give a few tips and tricks for people who are going to be going in person next week to visit their MPs. Peter, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So this slide has two photos of Lead Now volunteers who are holding signs outside of their MP's offices. These will look familiar if you were around for the Reject Tech campaign. And I just wanted to share a couple of best practices for your MP office drop-in. Some tips on taking good photos. Getting a good photo while you're doing your MP drop-in is key, because with a good photo, we can tell a story in one shot. We can put it on social media and amplify what we're doing, and it'll go to an audience of thousands, not just people who already support the emissions cap campaign, but also to reporters, and could be seen by the MP themselves, even if maybe they weren't available to meet with you in person. So these are examples from drop-ins that we did previously. And these photos are great because we can see the people who are doing the visit, their signs, and the MP's name in the photo. So you can see where they were and which MP they were pressuring in this campaign. And if you are able to get a picture while you're there, that is fantastic. You can always ask someone else to take it for you. And then what is really key is sharing the photo, because part of public pressure is raising visibility. Can we go to the next slide? All right, great. And these slides have text that I'll speak to with photos of Lead Now volunteers. So after your action, when you have your photo and you've had your great conversation, the way that we get these photos to an audience of thousands is posting it on social media and using our good friends' hashtags. So after you take your photo, if you have Twitter, you can tweet it using the hashtag #NoMoreDelays. We'll put that in the chat as well. And you can tag your MP using their Twitter handle, which we will follow up with you if you've signed up to do an office drop-in to let you know what that is. If you have Instagram, you can add it as an Instagram story. And you can also there use the hashtag #NoMoreDelays, and make sure to tag Lead Now so that we can add your story to our account and get more people to see it. And if you don't have these social media platforms, you can still take a photo and send it to us at photos@leadnow.ca, and we will share it on social media for you. And I don't want people to be worrying about writing down this email address or the hashtag, because we are going to email everyone who is at this call with all of this information in a follow-up, so that you'll have the instructions and know what it is that you need to do. And can we go to one more slide, please? Thank you. So this slide says using Slack and has the same photo of a Lead Now volunteer. Kate mentioned earlier that you would have the option of connecting with other Lead Now supporters in your area, so that if you want to go with other folks to your MP office drop-in, you'll have other people to do that with. So we use an app, called Slack. Some of you are already in the Lead Now Slack, but many probably aren't. So following this call, you'll get an email with a link to join that app. And you can use it on a computer, on a smartphone, on any electronic device. Once you sign up, you'll be connected with other Lead Now supporters across the country and specifically in your riding who might be going to your same MP office drop-in with you. So after you sign up today, you will be invited to join Slack by email, and we will make sure to help anyone who does join that space coordinate. This is totally optional. If you'd rather just go by yourself or with people you already know in person and are already connected to, that is also fantastic. We want to be getting as many of these happening as possible in a number of different ways. But if you're nervous to go yourself or just would rather connect with other people and get to do that together, this is also a great option, and we will be there to support you in finding those folks in your area. After you sign up, as I said, you'll receive a follow-up email, and that will have a link to a step-by-step toolkit to drop in on your MP, all of the information that we've shared today, or to phone those Liberal cabinet ministers, that link that was shared in the chat earlier. And if you're not sure what riding you live in, we'll follow up with you to make sure that you have that information and know where you can go. And you'll also receive an invitation to join the Lead Now Slack for the option to coordinate with other people in your riding. Again, you can do this action alone or with your own networks, or you can use the tool of Slack to connect with other people in your area. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at organize@leadnow.ca. That will also be in the follow-up email. And remember that when the visit is done, you can share photos with us and let us know how the visit went. All of this is part of building a narrative of people power in support of a bold emissions cap. So photos, hearing how those conversations went, doing it alone, doing it in groups, it all feeds into that campaign. And it's a huge help. I'm going to do one more update on how many signups we have here. All right, we're past 50 signups. That's incredible. And I'm sure more will be coming in. We'll have the link also going out in that follow-up email. So if you didn't get a chance to check your calendar and sign up yet, don't worry, you will have another chance right after this call when you get that email. And with that, I'll pass it back to Kate.
50 signups is so incredible, and it's so exciting to see everyone stepping up and maybe doing a thing that is a little bit out of your comfort zone. So thank you to everyone for signing up. You are still welcome to continue signing up. I know there's people on this call who are maybe thinking about it and are feeling a little bit nervous or a little shy. And this is your moment to take the leap and do it, because we are here to support you. And this is a moment where if you have the ability to step up, your voice and your presence is so needed. So thank you to everyone who signed up. We're going to share the link again in case you haven't had a chance to sign up yet. And I just want to say that the fight for a bold emissions cap has been long and ongoing. And we do have really good reason to be hopeful, because so far we know the pressure to pass substantial policy, climate policy, is on the rise. We know that Canadians right now are more concerned about the climate crisis than ever before. We were talking earlier about how some leaders within the Liberal Party are concerned about Albertans' lack of support for a policy like the emissions cap. But polling from within Alberta shows that a majority of people, even in one of the most oil-dependent provinces in the country, are in support of the fossil fuel industry paying their fair share. So we know the tides are turning against this old extractive regime. We know that that Canadians are ready for bold climate policy now. And we know that some MPs within the Liberal Party are already speaking out for a bold emissions cap, and that divisions on the issue within Cabinet are growing. And at the same time, again, we know that there's a loud chorus led by Canada's top fossil fuel companies angling to stop the policy in its tracks. So again, with Parliament returning to session in just under 2 weeks and a short window of time left to make sure that the emissions cap policy sees the light of day, we have a critical opportunity to make sure that the case for a bold emissions cap makes it to Parliament. And again, we really can't do it without you. So thank you so much for signing up. We'll be in touch with more support and next steps. And in the meantime, you're very welcome to reach out to all of us with your questions at organize@leadnow.ca. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for all of your work, and excited to keep on fighting with you for a bold emissions cap over the coming weeks and months. And with that, we will bring our organizing call to a close. If you would like to stick around to ask a question, you're very welcome to. And for everyone else, thank you again for being here. We will see you on Slack and over email. And I'm so excited to see what comes of your MP drop-ins in the week to come.
I'm seeing a few people raising their hands with questions, which is great. We do have a few more minutes here. So Linda Ruth, why don't you go ahead? We can. If someone who is on our tech team could ask to unmute for Linda Ruth, and then we can answer that question. Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks so much, guys. So I put on my form, I didn't pick a date because there actually is a little group of us. We're in Arif Virani's writing that have been putting pressure on him since, I guess, January. We had a virtual meeting with him, and then sometime during the summer, we showed up and protested outside of his office. So we have an email group, so I'm gonna, not everybody could come tonight. I said I would come and get all the info. So we're going to coordinate in our email group, pick a date, and then let you know. Is that okay? Kate, I have your email address. Can we just email you with the date then?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Great.
Thanks so much for going head to head with Arif Virani.
We hold his feet to the fire, that's for sure. And now he's Mr. Fancy Cabinet Minister, so even more so, right?
Yeah, no kidding. I bet that he rues the day. And Glenn, I see you have a hand up.
Yes, I do. Do you have any kind of suggestions for what a bold emissions cap is? I mean, is it so? If we go in and say we want a bold emissions cap, we want you to guarantee it, then he can come back and say, and I have a Liberal MP, he can say, well, I thought that was a bold emissions cap. Do you have a number or, a range that we are looking for them to put into the legislation? Because otherwise, it can get lost. We need to be specific.
Yes, and you're totally right. And we do actually. So when the toolkit gets sent to you, one of the things that will be inside it is an emissions cap fact sheet that we're going to be distributing to MPs over the course of the office drop-ins. And one of the things that it outlines is the particulars of what a strong emissions cap would look like. And I think someone already put it in the chat, but that's dead on. We're asking for a 60% reduction below 2005 levels by 2030. And especially with this policy where we know that the devil is in the details, and the Liberals are really good at dressing up a bad policy to look better than it is. Yeah. Holding to those specific metrics is going to be really important. So really good instinct there.
60% below 2005 levels by 2030 with reports on how they're doing on this every 6 months maybe.
Yes, and if once you receive the toolkit, there will also be some other specifics in there about the major loopholes that we would like them to address, and some more specifics.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I see Maureen has a hand up as well.
Yeah, Glenn pretty much asked my question. I need to get some familiarity with the numbers and where they're at now and where we want them to be. Also, an interesting fact would be what the oil and gas companies think is a fair number that they're trying to hold us to. So yes, where can I get more information about that without having to read reams and reams and reams? What's current?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done the work so that you don't have to read reams of research. And when you receive the toolkit, there will be the fact sheet for MPs that has some of the context on the emissions cap. And then we also have a couple articles linked if you do have investigative persuasion and want to dig in a little bit more. So.
Okay.
Yeah, all of that will be in the toolkit, and please don't feel the need to start diving into the research because there is
Thank you very much.
yeah, there's some long documents you can.
I don't mind doing some, but I don't want to start from 5 years ago and work my way up. Thank you.
Any other questions about yeah, running an MP office drop-in, about the emissions cap policy as a whole, or anything else?
Pardon me if I may, Maureen. I made myself a promise at the beginning of this that I wouldn't shoot off my mouth during the meeting. I think I've done that. The meeting is over. I think, Maureen, you were talking about what the promise was. Is that correct? Okay, that's fine. I'll just turn off my mic. Yeah.
Sorry, you got cut off, Ken. I do see that Bruce has a hand up. So Bruce, if you want to jump in, you're welcome to.
Yes. How does the emissions cap relate to fee and dividend?
Oof, that question is a little bit above my pay grade, but if anyone knows the answer, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it's completely different. It's sort of a different layer to try to do accomplish things in a different way. The critics say it's pancaking, you know, say take this policy, that policy, the other policy. The carbon fee and dividend, or the carbon tax, says, you know, will at this point on the industry side, it says we'll put a tax on what comes up the smokestack. But what comes up the smokestack for oil and gas, they only tax 7% of it. So Suncor, in a quarterly report last year, said, well, you know, when it goes up to $170 a ton, it'll change the price of producing a barrel of oil by 32 cents. So nothing. The carbon tax doesn't do it. So what these guys are saying is, we'll do another policy and we'll say the whole industry can only put out so much. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Ken. Thank you. And thank you to all of the policy wonks who know this policy inside and out. So we are coming up to the top of the hour, and it seems like questions are slowing down. So I think we may bring the call to a close here. But if anyone has any questions again about your MP office drop-in or needs any help getting started or filling out the sign-up form, you're very welcome to reach out to us at any time at the organize@leadnow.ca email address that I just dropped in the chat. Thank you to everyone who stuck around to ask questions and to respond to each other's questions. It was really cool to see that happening in the chat. Yeah, and thank you again for giving us your time. So we'll say goodnight, and thanks everyone again.
Thanks so much. So great to see everyone, and we're excited for next week.
Good night, take care.